They called it the death rattle of an empire. When the last camera rolled off the production line at Kodak Park in 2004, barely anyone noticed. But rewind a few decades, and this sprawling industrial complex in Rochester, New York, was printing money faster than it could print photographs. At its peak, Kodak didn't just dominate the photography industry, it was the photography industry. So what happened? How did a company that owned 90% of film sales in America end up auctioning off its factories for pennies on the dollar? The answer is darker and stranger than you might think. Let me take you back to 1880. A young bank clerk named George Eastman was working in Rochester, frustrated with the messy, complicated process of taking photographs. Back then, photography wasn't a hobby. It was almost a science experiment. You needed glass plates, toxic chemicals, and a portable darkroom the size of a small closet. Eastman saw an opportunity. What if ordinary people could take pictures without needing a chemistry degree? By 1888, he'd cracked the code. The Kodak camera hit the market with a brilliant pitch. You press the button, we do the rest. For $25, you got a camera loaded with film for 100 pictures. When you finished the roll, you mailed the entire camera back to Rochester. Kodak developed your photos, reloaded the camera, and sent it all back to you. It was genius, simple, revolutionary. The factory that would become Kodak Park opened in 1891 on a patch of land northwest of downtown Rochester. Back then, it was just a few buildings on 16 acres. But Eastman had vision. He wasn't building a factory. He was building a kingdom. By 1920, Kodak Park had exploded to over 200 acres with more than 70 buildings connected by tunnels and railways. On any given day, 20,000 workers flooded through its gates. These weren't just assembly line jobs either. Kodak employed chemists, engineers, researchers, all working to perfect the science of capturing light on paper. And here's where the story gets interesting. Kodak didn't just make cameras and film. The company built entire communities. They constructed houses for workers. They funded schools, libraries, and parks in Rochester. George Eastman himself donated millions to hospitals and universities, including the entire funding for MIT's second campus. Walking through Rochester in the 1950s felt like walking through a company town, except the company actually took care of you. Kodak offered profit sharing, retirement benefits, and something almost unheard of at the time, job security. If you worked at Kodak, you had it made. Oh, by the way, we're trying to reach 11,000 subscribers by the end of the month. If you're enjoying these stories about America's forgotten industrial giants, hit that subscribe button and help us get there. We've got some incredible episodes coming up. Now back to Kodak Park. During World War II, the factory switched into overdrive. Kodak produced reconnaissance film, aerial cameras, and even fire control equipment for bombers. The company's film helped map enemy territories and assess bomb damage. After the war, as American soldiers returned home and started families, Kodak rode the baby boom wave straight to the bank. Everyone wanted cameras to capture their kids' first steps. Family vacations, Christmas mornings. Color film exploded in popularity during the 1950s, and Kodak controlled nearly 85% of the camera market and 90% of film sales in the United States. The factory ran 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. Money poured in. But here's where the darkness creeps in. In 1975, a Kodak engineer named Stephen Sasson invented something that would eventually destroy the company he worked for. It was called a digital camera. This first prototype weighed 8 pounds and took black and white images at just a tiny fraction of a megapixel that it stored on a cassette tape. It was clunky, slow, and absolutely terrifying to Kodak's executives. They looked at Sasson's invention and made a choice. They buried it. Not literally, of course, but they shelved the technology, kept it quiet, and continued pumping billions into film production. Their reasoning seemed sound at the time. Why would we cannibalize our own film business? Why would we destroy the very thing making us rich? It was the biggest mistake in corporate history. While Kodak sat on digital technology, Japanese companies like Sony and Canon were racing ahead. By the 1990s, digital cameras were hitting the consumer market. They were expensive at first, but the writing was on the wall. Film was dying. Kodak finally started producing digital cameras in 1991, but by then they were playing catch-up in a game they'd invented. The company had spent so many decades as the unbeatable giant that they couldn't imagine a world where people didn't need film. They couldn't see the cliff until they were already falling off it. The decline happened faster than anyone expected. In 1988, Kodak employed over 60,000 people in Rochester alone. By 2012, that number had crashed to about 7,000. Kodak Park, once the beating heart of American photography, started shutting down buildings one by one. The company sold off sections of the campus. They closed production lines. They laid off workers who'd spent their entire lives expecting to retire from Kodak, just like their parents had. The famous yellow and red sign that dominated Rochester's skyline came down in 2007. For locals, it felt like watching a family member die slowly. In 2012, Kodak filed for bankruptcy protection. A company that had been worth $28 billion in 1997 was suddenly worth nothing. The factory that once produced millions of rolls of film every day sat mostly empty. Some buildings were demolished. Others were converted into office space or sold to pharmaceutical companies. Walking through the remains of Kodak Park today is like touring a ghost town built of brick and broken dreams. But here's the twist that makes this story even stranger. Kodak actually survived bankruptcy. The company restructured, emerged in 2013, and refocused on commercial printing and packaging. They still exist today, employing a few thousand people. They even released new film stocks for the handful of photographers who still shoot analog. But they'll never be what they were. The empire is gone. The kingdom crumbled. What's truly dark about Kodak's story isn't just the business failure. It's the human cost. An entire city built its identity around this company. Generations of families worked those production lines, trusted in the promise of stability, believed the giant was too big to fall. When Kodak collapsed, it took Rochester down with it. The city's population dropped by nearly 30% between 1950 and 2020. Neighborhoods that had thrived on Kodak paychecks withered. The betrayal wasn't that Kodak failed. Companies fail all the time. The betrayal was that Kodak had the cure for its own disease and chose not to take it. They had digital photography in their hands in 1975 and threw it away because they couldn't imagine a world beyond film. Today, you can still visit parts of the old Kodak Park complex. Some areas have been repurposed. New companies have moved in, trying to breathe life back into those massive buildings. But the ghosts remain. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the hum of machines that printed billions of photographs. The chatter of 20,000 workers clocking in for their shifts. The confidence of a company that thought it was invincible. Kodak's fall teaches us something uncomfortable. Success can make you blind. Dominance can make you stupid. And sometimes the thing that kills you is the thing you invented, but were too afraid to use. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's most tragic industrial stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We are uncovering the forgotten histories of factories, companies, and industries that built this country and then vanished. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.